Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. Hello and welcome to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature contest with...
You had it.
I was close, yeah. You know, normally I'd redo it, but it's not like a lot of people watch these things.
Yeah.
It's fine. You guys like, you like it when we goof up a little bit. You like things when they get a little unprofessional, a little crazy. Besides, this is what the like 6th or 7th episode we've done about Wheel of Time.
Oh, yeah.
We're on book 13 and 14 out of 15. So we're close to the end. So I assume if you're here at this point, you're probably used to us by now, our goofiness or whatever. You know that I am Hardleg Joe, and this lunky fella sitting next to me...
I'm lunky? Alright. This is CB Radio, the man who has read too many Wheel of Times books.
You haven't read as many as I have. What are you trying to say? You think I read too many?
I literally finished this book an hour before we did this recording. It is so fresh in my mind, it is ridiculous.
Yes, and once again we're doing these two at a time. We have done The Gathering Storm and Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson.
More Sanderson, though, and not entirely, but that's getting
it's really hard to say exactly how much was contributed, but anyway, our podcast, as always, will be broken up into two parts. We have our spoiler-free thoughts first, letting you know what we thought of the book, how we reviewed it without giving anything away, and then we'll discuss the meat and potatoes of things later. Although the spoiler-free thoughts at this point is pretty slim pickings. I don't know who's coming in the last two books who hasn't read anything and is still worried about spoilers.
If you are, you're dynamic, you're interesting, and I love you.
We want to hear from you down in the comments. Like, are you literally waiting for us to finish the entire series and just listening to the spoiler-free thoughts on all of them before deciding if you want to start?
I was specifically talking to that person who randomly just starts at the 11th book of the Wheel of Time. No other information, just started in the 11th.
They just like to jump in, just have a fun time.
You're that guy that jumps into the deep end with a bunch of weighted boots, and we're just like, all right, go for it.
Yeah, he's the guy who waited until Harry Potter was done and then read it from the last book backwards.
Oh man, it got really depressing at the beginning there. He's living in a closet.
Yeah, it just ends. If you watch Jaws backwards, it's about a shark that vomits up a bunch of people so much that they have to open a beach. It's pretty great. Anyway... overall, what did you think of these books?
Coming from the slog that we were at, this was really, really just like action. This was like the Infinity War of these books.
It really is a return to form.
Yeah.
It is. Knife of Dreams was pretty good, but these are like amazing.
Oh, yeah.
These are apparently the last 3 books were all originally intended to be one giant book.
Oh, God.
And I can't imagine having to read through that. Because we're just holding, I can barely hold both of these books together in my hand. I can't imagine having the third one. It would be like the biggest book ever written.
Not to mention the fact that these books, the story themselves, just do not give you a moment of rest. They give you little ones, but it's primarily just moving from...
You can tell this is the climax of the story. And it really does, after the epicness of 10, 11 books... everything coming to a close all at once, all the loose ends finally coming together. I cannot think of anything more grand and epic. The scale of leading into the final battle. We'll get to this when we talk about spoilers, but I have never in any amount of fiction seen such a world-changing type event as what's happening here.
I kind of put this akin to a semi-truck. You get it moving so quickly that it's going to take a lot more than a normal car to stop and get to the end. So it took 3 books there.
Yeah. And it really is, when you get to a series as long as Wheel of Time, you really got to stop looking at them as, individual books and start looking as, the entire series as a whole. Oh. And really, it's just amazing what he's done as far as, usually the climax is the most exciting part of every story. And here you have... 3 whole books of climax. Just absolutely astounding.
In the second book in this discussion, there's at least like 3 separate climaxes in the entire damn thing.
All the different characters have their things, and they actually intertwine a little bit more than they have in previous ones. So yeah, if you haven't read Wheel of Time yet for some reason, or you're worried about these ones, maybe the slog got you down, absolutely keep going. They are some of the best. And in fact, we should probably go ahead and get to that real quick. Every time we've opened up a Wheel of Time episode, we've started with our tier list. And we have pretty much almost the same. I mean, yours, I think New Spring is a little higher, but...
New Spring is a little higher simply because it brought me back.
Yeah. But other than that, we're kind of on the same page in here. So, S tier, we have still The Shadow Rising, probably the best book at the series, but coming up right behind it, possibly tied with it, The Gathering Storm. That book, like, absolutely blew me away. One of the best in the series, if not the best. Like, made me feel things. Really brought home the whole themes of everything culminating together in a way that was very satisfying. And then also an S tier, Lord of Chaos, the 6th book, the one that you jumped in on that we were both just astounded by again.
That's why I kind of flip the two of them, is because, like, the Gathering Storm is amazing and great, but Lords of Chaos brought me back into this story.
Yeah.
Whereas The Gathering Storm is really, really good, but it's also, I'm getting burnt out. Oh man, I've drawn too much of the power in. I just...
You're gonna explode, that and the TV show and everything. But either way, we both agree that those two are an S tier. You never read The Shadow Rising, but trust me, if you had, it would be an S tier.
Alright.
And then an A tier at the very top, that's where I'm going to put Towers of Midnight. That one, it almost kind of suffers just from the fact that it's after The Gathering Storm. It is a great romp all the way through, paced very well, epic moments, lots of character moments, but it doesn't really hit on that emotional level as well as Gathering Storm did, just because it's repeating some of the stuff that Gathering Storm already did.
That, and also, like, some of the actual, like, prose or the decisions that happen in the Gathering Storm, they rhyme. They kind of flow together.
It's poetic.
It is very poetic.
It's very, like, epic. And that word gets thrown around a lot, but we really do mean it as, like, you know, world-spanningly, everything comes together epic.
Ironically epic, and also incredibly personal in some of them.
Oh, yeah.
In one respect.
It is really interesting how there's, like, a moment there where it all comes down to one person's, like, inner monologue deciding on something, but that hinges on, like, the entire world hinges on what he thinks.
Yes.
So it's this personal decision that reverberates throughout the entire world. And just showing how, like, it's amazing. We'll get to it once we get there. But, yeah, A tier, we got The Tower of Midnight, The Dragon Reborn, which you did not read, but same thing. Very action-y throughout, but nothing, like, super special. Knife of Dreams, After the Slog, Path of Daggers, we both kind of liked more than... A lot of people consider that the slog, but we're like, that was a pretty good one.
Yeah.
B tier, we've got Winter's Heart, The Great Hunt, Crown of Swords, New Spring. You would probably put New Spring higher.
Oh, yeah, I put it in A tier.
And then C tier, just everything else. Eye of the World, Fires of Heaven, Crossroads of Twilight. Twilight could maybe be in D tier, especially after seeing everything else. Like, that was a story where really just nothing happened.
Yeah.
You might have been a little too charitable about it, but... Even then, I don't remember hating Crossroads of Twilight. I'd be fine with, like, rereading it again, going through the whole series.
Essentially, because we've gotten to this point, it feels like if we went back through the books, the momentum of the story would carry us through a lot easier, because we didn't know what was going to come after this. But if you're rereading it, Crossroads of Twilight still can keep that C tier, I'd say.
Yeah. So there's our current tier list. These are among the best, if not some of the best. Really looking forward to that final story. And then the only other thing really to talk about in the spoiler-free thoughts is just Brandon Sanderson coming in. If you're unfamiliar, Robert Jordan, I believe he had cancer. I probably should have looked this up. He had some health problem.
Yeah, I believe it was cancer.
He knew he was going to die within like a year or two, cobbled everything together. And then his widow gave it to Brandon Sanderson, who is another accomplished author. He's the guy who did...
Mistborn. He did Way of Kings.
Yes, Way of Kings. Stormlight Archive. That's what I was trying to think. I almost called it King Killer Chronicles, but that's an entirely different thing. That's not Sanderson.
That's Rothfuss, and they were looking for the third book. But no.
But yeah, they brought Brandon Sanderson in, and he's just done like a pretty great job. There's some moments where you can kind of tell it's not quite Jordan, but you can also tell that this is a guy who has read all the books up to this point, probably multiple times, but his style's not exactly the same as Jordan's.
I mean, admittedly, I think you read this, and I watched a video that was part of the audiobook, because as you listeners know, I listen to the audiobook. There's a little snippet at the end of the Gathering Storm where he has this little interlude about talking about getting the phone call from Jordan's widow and talking about how he was attempting to not replace Jordan, but to adapt his style to Jordan as opposed to just like overtaking it.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good way to explain how he did this, because it's clearly not Jordan, but it's clearly kind of in Jordan's style. There's a lot of the things that retain. He still keeps all the information. He still like goes about dresses and the inner monologues and everything in the same way that Jordan would. It's mostly just kind of like word choice. And I forget where I heard this. Someone pointed out that like there's just something about Jordan where he's like a little bit older and he uses some words that like kind of have fallen out of favor these days. Specifically, if you look at like Knife and Dreams, where Egwene is in the White Tower, they talk about her being punished, and Robert Jordan will say she's spanked or birched, which is accurate, but it I don't know. Those words kind of have different connotations these days. Where when you get into the Gathering Storm, Sanderson is going to say she's being beat, which kind of gets more across this idea of like, this is not some kinky thing. This is like a punishment.
I don't know. I really, as I'm kind of an old fogey kind of guy, but I like the term birching because it has this very old feel of it. Like someone literally told you, go snap a twig off that damn birch and you come back. And
it also makes a lot more sense as far as like, historically, spanking has been something that like, I know Robert Jordan talked about he based the White Tower off of convents. Mm-hmm. Like, young nuns were punished. Young nuns were probably punched too.
Punch a nun, yeah.
But traditionally, it was something that was applied to, like, not only just, like, children, but, like, adults as well. Like, it was just a punishment. It was something, a way that they tried to get you to obey if you were being rebellious or if you made a mistake. There was this idea that they could just sort of, like, beat obedience into you, which is really outdated, but it makes sense that they would have that kind of opinion.
I feel like it's kind of used more along the lines of, like, shock therapy, where it gets you to come out of yourself, but this is getting into the whole politics of spanking or any crap of that, and that is 100% what Jordan wants to talk about in these books, so let's get into that. No, Yeah, the word choices that Jordan uses...
I know there's a couple more examples. I just can't think of them off the... I know that, like, there's also another thing where Jordan goes a lot more in-depth about horses. Mm-hmm. You could tell that Jordan was, like, a horse guy, and he knew stuff about horses, and he uses these terms that I still don't know exactly what, like, a gelding is.
Yeah, I didn't know until I read these books that I am a horse guy, and I really want to learn more about horses because of this. Also, just on the opposite end, because we've already read like Mistborn and The Way of Kings, some of the choreography, essentially in some of the scenes, does feel a little bit more Sanderson-y. It doesn't exactly scream as much as his other books are, but you can feel it.
Yeah, just a little bit. But again, it doesn't really... It's one of those things where if we weren't sitting here trying to think of things for the podcast, like, I wouldn't have noticed. If his name wasn't on here, I probably would have read this and just been like, he's getting better at writing as he goes along, or his writing style changed slightly as he went along. But it really does, you do have that Robert Jordan feel.
Yeah. Like you said, it still has the framework that he probably laid down. We don't know how many chapters he wrote or anything like that, but it does feel like he basically had a book with a bunch of chapters and some empty pages, and Sanderson just wrote in the rest of the stuff in between.
Yeah, and maybe changed up, edited, punched. I mean, he had... Robert Jordan's widow was also his editor. Mm-hmm. And so he had... Working with her, so she could help keep things together, and she had access to all the notes. And either way, it turned out good, and that's really all we have to say without jumping into it. So as always, this is the spoiler warning. If you want to go into this blind, now is your chance to duck out. Otherwise, we're going to assume that you've either already read this or are not going to read it. We're not gonna hold your hand.
You've been warned.
Yeah.
All right. So, some of the stuff that happens in the Gathering Storm is just so poetically beautiful, like the ending.
Yeah.
Like the ending with Rand, and he's on the top of Dragon Mount, mixed with Egwene on the top of the White Tower. You had this beautiful connection that I didn't see until after you had told me about it, and is amazing.
Yeah. Just the whole... Basically everything about the Gathering Storm, what kind of makes it so beautiful, is how it brings home the themes of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And it does it in a way that... The same way that Wheel of Time always does, right? Why I like it a lot more than something like The Way of Kings, where I felt like there was a mystery and they were trying to get you with a twist.
Yeah.
And in this, it's like, I didn't realize up until now that the entire book was about balance. But then when you say it is, I realize it was there all along.
Yeah.
It was always there and I just couldn't see it for whatever reason. But when you have, Rand standing on Dragon Mount, and he has finally found balance between himself and Lews Therin, the voice in his head. He's, they have this thing, like, the two voices became one.
Yeah.
And Rand realized what he is, what he always was. And then, the cloud cover that has been over the entire world. Basically, the Gathering Storm starts with, it's cloudy.
Mm-hmm.
It's cloudy everywhere. And it's been that way for weeks.
And it's getting worse. Like, this big dark cloud is coming towards these two random farmers.
Yeah.
Which is a really good way of showing,
we'll get to that in general. But I was just saying, the cloud cover's everywhere. And then Rand finds this balance. And suddenly the cloud cover breaks. Mm-hmm. Suddenly there's a literal ray of hope. And then it zooms out to Egwene, who has united the tower, who has found a balance between the rebels and the non-rebels, and she's standing there looking out of this hole in the broken tower that she knows she's going to fix. And she can see on Dragon Mount that this light is shining down, and she feels that same hope, that same sense of, things are going to balance out. And then not only do each of them have that thing, not only does Tar Valon have its own balance, but it really just hammers home, the thing that's been staring us in the face the whole time, the Eyes to Die symbol.
Yeah.
The dragon's fang and the flame of Tar Valon.
Ah, okay.
The two of them and the way they form the sort of yin-yang symbol. It's always been about balance. That's the entire logo of the Wheel of Time. And I just don't know why it never struck me as hard. I think part of it's the fact that, I've been told stories about balance my entire life. This is not, some brand new topic. There's countless stories. Mm-hmm. As many stories as there are about love, there's stories about, finding balance in your life. But I feel like most of the time through my life, it's almost been, glossed over or oversimplified. A lot of people equate balance with, centrism or, neutrality. There's this image of, sort of the flaws of centrism, where you have the KKK on one hand with torches, and on the other hand you have a bunch of darker skinned people we want rights, and there's a guy in between maybe we could find a compromise. Mm-hmm. And it's no, there's some things you don't compromise on. You don't balance everything. You don't be well, I was good today, which means I can steal a little bit later.
Yeah, it's
this really... It took 15 books to get here, but it explained in a totally nuanced and real-world sort of way this idea that the world is black and white and also shades of gray. There are some things that are unequivocally good and unequivocally evil, but within those, you also have to have balance between how you handle those different things. Justice is not a very simple concept, as we find out with everything going on with the White Cloaks and Perrin.
Yeah.
In the second book, not the second book, but the second one, the Towers of Midnight. that one gets a little bit more into, like, the White Cloaks want to do good. Galad specifically wants to be, like, a good person. He's like, Perrin committed murder. He must suffer. And it takes his mother, like, Morghese, to come in and sort of be like, well, sometimes the right thing to do and the just thing to do aren't so easy.
Not to mention the fact that Perrin also has this struggle inside of him of being like, this thing has been hunting me for this entire time. I have to come to terms with it.
Yeah.
But I also have to come to terms with the fact that I am a lord and that people are counting on me and that I actually have to take up that mantle. It's this
he's a simple blacksmith, and he's a lord, and he's a wolf. Mm-hmm. He is a little bit of everything. All these different parts that have to find a balance with each other in order to work out in a way that is utterly good. Because good, like again, there is good and evil, and by giving into any one of those things, he can commit evil, right? Like, if he decides he doesn't want to be a lord and he doesn't lead people, if he just wants to be that blacksmith, then people will die because of it. But if he gets too much into a lord, if he becomes really haughty, if he becomes too full of himself, then you could cause bad things to happen. And if he lets the wolf take over too much, if he gets aggressive and ragey, then bad things can happen.
Awesome things. Awesome things, but bad things, yes.
Yeah, well, you've always got it. You can't be there too strongly.
Yeah.
Which is the wolf way of saying you need to have balance.
But also, speaking of, like, you're talking about the balance and all that stuff, and I took another thing from the end of the Gathering Storm a little bit, because, like we talked about, the Rand on the top of Dragon Mount, and he's having this internal monologue, and it shows him, it's called Threads of Gold, which we've already established in the Bond is a thread of love. And at one point in time, he's just tearing himself up inside, and he starts like crying out to the wheel, to the creator, why? What's even the purpose? What is even the thing? Because
why do we keep getting reborn if we're just going to struggle and die again?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Wheel of Time is all about reincarnation. Ages come to pass, and the wheel keeps turning. Like, what's the point of going on if it's just going to keep going?
And you do get these feelings of threads of gold from the three women that he's bonded. And then I believe that there is, I don't know if I've actually looked into it too much on this, but that pinprick of light from the sky is also a thread of gold. That it feels like it is a call from the creator that he's just been screaming out to for the last 2 or 3 pages. And that is a thread of gold. And that, to me, that speaks a very monotheistic feel that I really, really liked on that.
There is a God, and it does care in some small way.
Mm-hmm. And there is a purpose and a good reason for what is happening. And yeah, that was a very good mountaintop moment for me on that one.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the covering for the cover for the Gathering Storm, either the original one or the much better audiobook ones. They're both pretty good. But I actually found a fan cover, and I think it gets across the idea of the Gathering Storm much better. And I'm going to go ahead and put it on screen. If you're watching this on YouTube, you should be able to see it. But yeah, just that moment alone, like, made that book and also, like, made the series for me.
Yeah, you could have possibly ended a lot of the story right there.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, like, that's kind of what makes Towers of Midnight not quite that S tier, is because, in a lot of ways, with Egwene and Rand, our two, like, main characters, arguably, they're on, like, falling action. Like, they've resolved things, and now all that's left to do is fight the final battle.
Admittedly, yeah, all of Towers of Midnight is Rand being like, I'm going to right every wrong that I did.
Yeah.
It will take as long as it takes, and I will do it before the final battle, but I will do it.
Yeah.
And
it's this sense of, like, instead of being burdened by his destiny, he understands it, and he is going to fulfill it to the best of his ability. He's come to accept it.
And Egwene is fully Amyrlin at this point. Like, she was already Amyrlin, but now that the White Tower is fully, completely whole, she is basically like, well, I have Amyrlin things to do, and I'm doing them.
And she still has, like, a pretty good battle in this, in the Towers of Midnight, one of the better ones in the world of dreams with all this stuff, and she has like a literal battle of willpower with one of the Forsaken that has just like one of the most like badass moments, like chills through the spine. Like, I am a mountain and you are an ant. You cannot even hope to stand against me. It's like, whew. But at the same time, that feels like her journey already completed, and now we just get to see, like, you know, badass Super Saiyan Egwene showing her power off to someone who she already should have defeated long ago.
And the best part of that is that I think that it's also inspired by the more badass line for me, though. That, like, Perrin just shows up in this encounter, and someone literally fires the nuke of the series at him, and he brushes it off. He's like,
they fire Balefire, and he just uses in the world of dreams. It's interesting how, like, when this series started, the one power was the magic, and it seemed very much like a soft magic system. And as we've gotten more and more into it, we learned that, like, no, there are very definite rules about how you channel and what types of weaves you use and how you can use those weaves and under what conditions. And then as they were doing that, they were also building up Tel'aran'rhiod, the world of dreams, which is not really like a dream world. It's more like an astral plane, almost.
Yeah, I'd put it, the astral plane.
Which is a very soft magic system, where while you're there, like, your thoughts are reality. And that's always been kind of the case. They make a mention of, like, when they go there, at first they have trouble, like, retaining what clothing they want to wear. You know, they talk about the Forsaken and they get scared and suddenly they're in armor. Yeah. Because their, like, subconscious leaks through. And Egwene has been going through this thing of, like, oh, she's learned to put herself in whatever clothes she wants. And meanwhile, Perrin's been going into the wolf dream, which we never realized until now was Tel'aran'rhiod. I always thought it was, like, kind of connected, but I didn't know it was the exact thing until Egwene's having a battle in the dreams, or in the world of dreams, Perrin's in the wolf dream, and suddenly they meet each other there. And Egwene is like, Perrin, you need to get out of here. It's very dangerous. And he's like, you need to get out of here. It's very dangerous. And then, a dark sister shoots balefire at him.
Like,
and
point blank, too.
Yeah, and he's just like, that's not hitting me. And it just, like, curves away from him. And she's like, you moved balefire. He's like, it's just a weave. Here, that means nothing.
I'm like, that was
nothing can touch me unless I deem it so.
I 100%, after hearing that line, stopped the audiobook and called Joe up immediately to scream that at him, because that was such a dope moment.
It is such a badass thing, because it's like, you know, we knew that Perrin was kind of getting good at this whole wolf dream thing, but because you weren't exactly sure if it was Tel'aran'rhiod, you didn't realize how badass of a dreamer he was becoming until, like, he meets Egwene, who half of her story has been learning Tel'aran'rhiod. Of all the Aes Sedai, she's probably the best at it. I mean, she literally uses her willpower to crush someone else's willpower.
She breaks a fucking Forsaken with her mind.
But when she meets Perrin, she's like, you're gonna be in danger, and she tries to tie him up with ropes, and he just, like, walks out of them, like, you know a little bit. Like, it doesn't faze him at all. Like, he has become so much more powerful.
Oh, yes.
And again, it does that good thing of, like, you know, it should be a twist, but it's not. It was there the whole time. I should have known better. And looking back, it's like, that was always true. I just didn't realize it until then. It's such masterful, like, plotting and the way he writes it and everything. It's, chef's kiss. Yeah.
And it's also really good because, like, he balances these moments with the tower in the Tel'aran'rhiod, and also with another fight outside of that, just outside the door, where Gawain is fighting off 3 assassins.
Blood knives.
Yeah, that they talked about in the last book, that you're just like, oh, whatever happened to those guys?
Yeah.
And
I didn't know they had stuck around. I thought they got out when all the rest of the Shan-Chan got out.
I knew that they hadn't got out, but when they were talking about the assassin, my brain didn't connect the two. I was like, oh yeah, this is obviously Masana. This is obviously the Dark Sister. And then it's like, oh no.
Yeah, this is an entirely different thing that we are not prepared for.
As soon as the Shan-Chan woman noticed the knife, I'm like, oh shit. They didn't leave.
They've been here the whole time.
Also, there's still some foreshadowing in there because Gawain took all the rings and didn't tell anyone because he's a dipshit.
Yeah.
But just like...
I guess for the people who either don't remember or didn't read, just real quick, the Shan Chan have elite soldiers called Blood Knives, where apparently they have some kind of magical ter'angriel that, like, improves their speed and durability, survivability, also helps them blend in with shadows so that it's difficult to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
But it also will kill them in, like, a week, or, like, 2 weeks, I think they said it was.
A month.
And they're, like, a month at most.
Yeah.
So it does this thing where it's like, yeah, it puts your body to superhuman limits, but it also makes it so, like, you will die. And so they send those to, like, hide in the tower, find things out, and then at the right time, strike.
Mm-hmm.
And take everything, as many people with you as you can before it goes out.
And they do that. They get... Yeah. If Gawain hadn't been there, they would have done that.
Yeah,
and
they would have absolutely killed the Amerlin, and she wouldn't even known that it was people from Shan Chan.
And also, the dope part about this is that Gawain gets a moment of being badass, because these are 3 superhumans.
Yeah.
And also, later on, they actually have to deal with, they find that there's a 4th one, and they say offhandedly that it took a warder and, like, 2 sisters to kill one of them, and he killed 3 of them in a knife fight. Or sword fight, but still,
yeah,
like...
close range sword fight. I do love that moment, too. It's something that I've seen in, like, I don't know how many different pieces of fiction, but here it was just so genius. Where it's like, you know, he's trying to fight them, but he can't look at them straight. He can barely see their moves because they look like blurs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just, like, he knocks over the lamp. He knocks out the lights, and he's like... You know, well, if I can't see you, you can't see me either. Are you prepared to fight in the darkness?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you could fight against someone who can't see you, but what about someone you can't see?
Mm-hmm.
But then what even makes that better, right, is that usually they would have something where, like, they're completely unprepared to fight in the dark. But they were prepared, and then he was prepared for that. Because he, like, I believe what he did is, like, kicks a pillow or something, and then they attack where that is.
Also, yeah, there's a lot of, like... shows and cartoons and stuff where they show like all the lights have gone out and a character holds perfectly still to try and like minimize noise, and this book caught it way better because it shows him like in the internal monologue being like he wanted to attack, he wanted to move, but he shouldn't because any of the slightest sound
because you're fighting. I think he killed one at this point, but there's 2 left, and there's like I could maybe strike out and kill one. But as soon as I did, the other one knows where I'm at because they can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that, like, I would love to see in the show, but because it's literally people fighting in pitch blackness, I have no idea how you show that visually.
Now, a fight that you would definitely be fun to watch in the show, and it's going to be awesome, is Matt taking on the Golem, where he's literally, like, juggling fox head medallions. Like, oh, it was so cool. I think he straps 2 of them to his fists to just, like, beat him down.
I completely forgot the Golem fight was there.
Yeah, like, there's so many good fights in the Towers of Midnight.
Yeah. It's hard to remember them all.
Mm-hmm.
They get to be fair, Matt's fight gets kind of overshadowed by, like, Perrin and Egwene's fight having simultaneously.
Yeah.
Plus, Perrin has that really cool, like, it's really interesting to see Robert Jordan explain, like, a fighting style that we would look at now and be like, oh, this is some Naruto shit.
Yeah.
Or this is some Dragon Ball Z shit. In the World of Dreams, they did this a lot in the 4th book. That was where Perrin first fought Slayer.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's this thing of, like, in the World of Dreams of, like, I'm standing on a hill and I'm looking at a mountain and I take a step and I'm on the other mountain. Where you just sort of, like, zoom ahead to wherever you are. And as they get into this fight, it's this idea of, like, wherever you can perceive yourself, you can appear. So they're, like, teleporting through the woods, throwing knives and arrows and shit at each other.
In that story, but in the Towers of Midnight, it's literally, like, close quarters ones. Like, they're, like... He swings his hammer, I think it is in this one.
Yeah.
And barely misses him, and then he finds him on his shoulder, and then he gets, like, a swing at him, and it's just very, like...
Yeah, they're, like, teleporting around each other, but then also fighting across just, like, huge swaths of land. Just, like, fighting across the continent, like, teleporting miles and miles with each step. And then because it's a dream world, like, they go out over the ocean, and they're just, like, walking on the water.
I think my favorite part of that is still, like, not my favorite part, but one of my favorite parts is the moment you realize that the two dreams have fused, where, like, everybody in the tower that's trying to get away is like, all right, we want to teleport away. Why can't we teleport away? Our weaves aren't moving. And it's just like, and then you're like, oh, that dream spike.
Yeah.
That's with Perrin. Oh, no.
And Perrin went to the tower, and you realize both these things are happening simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we've gotten way... as always, we started talking about some cool themes, and then got into just like, wasn't it badass? Remember when that happened?
Mm-hmm. Also, not so much the badass fight moment, but Perrin has a similar kind of moment where he is actually, like, forging a hammer, but is somehow getting the power infused into it and looking really badass. But Perrin is having this amazing inner monologue of folding together all three parts of himself into that. And
the three parts of himself are the three parts of the big warhammer that he melds together.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's just another one of the things I wanted to talk about for half a second, because like almost all of the all three of them in these stories, like the last story was Rand's big moment like that. You have Perrin having the hammer, and in this one, in Towers of Midnight, Matt has kind of that moment at the end of the story where he's, I don't know if it's so much that he's accepting himself, but he's accepting that he has to do, he should stop running away from the battles. Yeah,
that sometimes he has to, I mean, of all the characters, Matt has, like, the least of an arc. Mm-hmm. Because he does still feel like Matt more than any of the other characters. But all throughout it, it's been this thing of the general inside him is fleeing from fights. Mm-hmm. He's very much this Sun Tzu of, like, the best won battle is the one that you don't have to fight. Mm-hmm. He always tries to escape. He only fights when he absolutely has to.
And he usually wins.
And he usually wins because of it. Because he's not falling into traps. He's not being too aggressive. He's backing up and making sure that they fight on his terms, under his conditions, in the things that are most favorable to him. And his one sort of arc at the end of Towers of Midnight is him going into an unknown situation where he knows that he's not going to be able to do that. In him risking something even though he doesn't have to, even though he's safe. But he's just like, no, I have to do this, so I'm going to do this.
And it also still falls perfectly in with Matt's character. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere because it's Matt finally... It's a combination of Matt's determination to do what he says he's going to do, and then finally to not run away from something that he
is scared of, something he doesn't like, something that's uncomfortable. Because he loses his eye in this one. It gets eaten by fox monsters.
Yeah, Perrin's the only full-bodied person out of the three of them now.
And it's one of those things too, like when Rand loses a hand, and then I'm like, wait, I've seen a bunch of pictures of them at the end of this. I've seen, like, fan art and stuff of Rand, and then you go back and, like, in every fan art, his hand is, like, behind his back, or it's hidden in some pose or whatever. It never looks awkward, but it's like, they're hiding it. And it's the same thing. You go back and you look at all these pictures of Matt, and he's always got the brim of his hat pulled down over one of his eyes.
Well, it happened in the second to last book. For me, it was going up to, like, the wiki and seeing the picture that I'd been seeing several times with him, and I'm like, he does have an eye patch. I'm such a fucking idiot. Oh. But
I will say that the one thing that kind of took me out of that whole section in general was how much he does after he gets his eye taken out. Because he's still surprisingly, like, coherent and runs a whole lot and does a lot of stuff, despite the fact that he should be bleeding pretty heavily out of his face.
This is also magic. So the thing that I would have thought about that would be like, how is he able to fight and all this stuff? But they figure out a way to show you how good it is he's okay, or how okay he is even with missing one eye, because he's just like, oh man, he gets away from the group and he's like lamenting to himself, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to protect myself? And then he just like throws a knife behind himself and hits a rabbit. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I get to rely heavily on my luck now. Congrats.
Congrats. Hopefully, they keep saying he has the Dark One's own luck. So I'm wondering if, like, once they get to the final battle, the Dark One's gonna take his luck back or something. I'm not sure if that's just a turn of phrase or if he does have some kind of connection. Because of the dagger, maybe.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's just his Taviran nature just being like pump, pump, pump.
Possibly.
But I also really like the idea that I know this is not going to happen, that Rand is not the final battle, that it's literally just the Dark One comes out with a set of dice, and Matt's just like, let's roll, baby.
Matt has the dice, the Dark One, to determine the fate of the world.
He dances with the Jack of Shadows. He dices with him, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, So it feels like this is, we've had the conclusion of all the characters' like emotional arcs.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, like we said, Matt's is a little lukewarm comparatively to like
compared to everyone else. That's the only reason why the Towers of Midnight would be a little bit below everything, is because Egwene and Rand have their big moments, the idea of balance, and then you get to the Towers of Midnight, and the rest of the characters, like, Matt's doesn't really come together as well, and Perrin's in a lot of ways, like, him dealing with the wolf is very parallel to Rand dealing with Lews Therin.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of feels almost like a retread. It's different enough that it's still compelling, but it doesn't hit with that same, like, realization, because you already realize that, like, this is just a balance in a different way.
Well, I kind of see Rand's as being like a coming out of depression, because it definitely feels like that, and it feels like that for the entire world. Whereas Perrin's feels like a responsibility taking up, like a fully accepting moment.
Yeah, because Perrin's always been kind of depressed.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the show. For other reasons.
Even in this. I mean, that's kind of that weird thing, right? Is we've always been talking about how the three Ta'veren deal with, like, destiny. And Perrin was just shrug his shoulders and be like, I guess I gotta do what I gotta do. Mm-hmm. And Rand's been the guy who, like, no, you gotta try to trick destiny. You gotta run with it for a while, and then you can hard left when they least expect it.
And Matt's over here being like, screw destiny. I just want to dice and talk to women.
And so, you know, it's basically, as far as Perrin and Rand, they're learning opposite lessons. Mm-hmm. It's Rand has accepted destiny in the way that Perrin kind of did a long time ago, but he accepted it sort of in a depressed way. And Perrin is learning to be like, no, I can stand up and take charge of my destiny and do this in my own way.
And again, Matt is just realizing you have a destiny, damn it. Yeah. Just do it, all
Matt is just realizing that he cannot run away from destiny forever. He does have to do something. But yeah, enough about, man, we really just took that one idea of balance and just went everywhere with it. But it really does overshadow both of these books.
Because it's literally the overarching thing of the entire story.
Yeah, the entire series, like, everything comes home to it. But there is one other interesting thing, which we kind of touched on earlier when we were talking about Rand with Lews Therin, talking about, you know, why do we keep going on this wheel of time? What's the point of going on if we're just going to repeat the same stuff over and over and over again?
You're right. What is the point?
And Lews Therin is the one who says, maybe this time we can do better. Mm-hmm. Maybe the point of going over in the wheel of time, of being reborn, is to learn from our past mistakes, to try to improve things, if not completely, just a little bit each time. If we could just make it that tiny bit better, then it'll all have been worth it.
I love that line that he says at the end of Towers of Midnight, where Min's like, how is it different? And Rand literally says, I was raised better.
Yeah. How is it going to be different this time? I was raised better this time.
There were more people.
He's not as cocky, and there are more people here to help him.
Mm-hmm. And there's a Cadswain to be like, boy.
Yeah. Although he's like, you should really call me Rand Sedai. Or at least Lord Rand, or Rand Althor. I'm like 400 years older than you.
I was to the best of my knowledge, I was the last male Aes Sedai that didn't get corrupted.
Yeah.
Like, might be that little last part was a little bit there.
But yeah, it's just this point of every time they bring up the Wheel of Time, it's sort of depicted as like a wagon wheel. They talk about each age kind of being like spokes of the wheel. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Wheel of Time logo, that's exactly what it is. It's a spoked wagon wheel with like two snakes intertwining through it. And so they've kind of taught you to think of the wheel as like a literal wheel, as a closed circuit where you're just going around and around. And this kind of brings up the fact that it's more like a spiral. Which I really like. The show's logo kind of leans into that. Instead of being a straight wheel, it is a spiral that goes in on itself. And they've actually been bringing that up in the earlier episodes, the idea of like, the Tinkers do good not for the right now, but to make the world better for future generations, future turnings of the wheel. And I really like that idea. The idea of the cyclical nature of time has been around for a while. Like, it exists kind of in Norse mythology, it exists in sort of like Buddhist, a little bit in Hindu, a lot of Eastern Taoism is this idea of like, time just repeats itself. And even a lot of early fantasy, I forget where I heard this, but I seem to remember seeing more than one video talking about how Tolkien looked at Lord of the Rings as this cycle, but as a cycle where things were breaking down over time. The world was becoming less magical, less spectacular, more mundane as it went on. And I love that this takes those ideas and adds the, like, tiny twist that instead of getting worse or instead of just staying the same, every time things get a little bit better. As time goes on, things very, very gradually improve, but they are improving. It also kind of makes sense where people talk about, like, we don't have any really strong leaders these days. We don't have, like, where are our kings? Where are our generals? And to me, it's this idea that, like, regular people are getting good enough, are becoming awesome enough, that we don't need individuals to lead big masses of people. The masses of people themselves can be awesome. And you're kind of seeing that idea represented in Wheel of Time when you talk about, like, Lews Therin had 100 companions, but he couldn't get the female Aes Sedai on board with him.
Yeah.
As he says, I wasn't raised right, I didn't have a good community, and I also didn't have people to help me out to sort of lead me from going astray when I wanted to do this. That's why we're seeing this return. But this time it's a little bit better. Not because Lews is stronger. If anything, he's somewhat weaker, but he has strong people around him because everything else has improved.
Yes. And yeah, I can definitely see it in that story. I don't know if I completely agree with your ideas of like the leaders and all that type of stuff. It's always difficult trying to, maybe not difficult is the word. It's always a little foolish to try to bring literary ideas into the real world because it doesn't really work like that. The real world is a lot more messy and chaotic and not nearly as planned as like a fictional story is where people can make it make sense. Yeah, everything ties together in the end of a story like that, and rarely do you see anything in your life tie together that well. But yeah, it's the spirals of the story do start seeming more and more like that. Like, there's hope. There's things that turn the wheel in a good way, not just like, oh, you have to deal with all the crap and all the garbage and all this. Like, heck, they talk about it in the show where this character is just like, everybody goes through the same thing over and over again. The wheel just, if you suffer forever. Yeah. And in this, it's just like, maybe you don't suffer forever. Maybe you suffer for a reason. And this is really interesting stuff.
You suffer for a time, but maybe next turning will be better. Which doesn't do much to save you on this life at the moment. But it is sort of comforting in a grand scale. Again, going back to the show, it does a really good job, like, with the Tinkers, again, coming back to this idea of, contrasting them with the Dark Friend. The Dark Friend wants to stop the wheel because they believe nothing ever is going to get better. And the Tinker looks at the world and realizes it's bad, but realizes if I can make things just slightly better, then things will only continue to get better. If I can convince two people to follow the way of the leaf, and they can convince two people, even if it takes them in their entire lives to do so, then things will eventually get better.
But Daniel Green said it was a cult. So
they are a little culty.
Yeah, especially in the show. They seem very much just like...
Which, I mean, it does kind of fit, because at least in the books, there are a lot of people who don't trust Tinkers, who say that they're thieves, and they'll steal your kids, and they'll steal your stuff, and they get run out of towns a lot. And now in the show, it makes a little more sense, because they're kind of more culty in the show. Yeah. Either way, I think we've probably gone on enough. Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about in particular?
Not really.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly more things we could talk about. But I feel like we've hammered home those main themes. And, there's always a chance, the second time around, the wheel is always better. So maybe when we're finished, maybe not immediately, but maybe a couple years from now, after we've had some life experiences, come back, work our way through the wheel of time, knowing what we know.
Thank God you're saying not now, not immediately. I don't think I could take it.
No, as much as I love this series, I am going to be kind of glad when it's finally done.
Yeah, it's a lot of really good story, but it's also that idea of like, we want the catharsis of the end, I think.
Yeah.
It's just like...
we need to reach the finish line so we could just absorb it and then focus on the show and also getting other series. Stormlight Archive, maybe. Although that's unfinished, so I don't know, I'm kind of weary about that.
Yeah, there are several other stories we could dive into, but for right now, this has been the Gathering Storm and
Towers of Midnight. I keep wanting to say The Towers. It's always hard to remember which ones have the at the beginning and which ones don't. But yeah, very, very good books, and very excited about the next one. Although we won't be doing A Memory of Light next month, because it'll be December, and December here on Legs Talk About Books is Graphic Novel Month. Since we're approaching the holidays, we want to do something a little lighter, just a short one-shot with a lot of pictures. I know that kind of sounds like we're demeaning graphic novels, but you can generally get through the graphic novel a little faster than a book. And we have decided this time, after doing 2 years of non-superhero stuff, we're finally going to get some capes.
All right.
I'm
more worried about like the tights and maybe like underwear on the outside as I wear them.
Yeah, a lot of people had suggested we do Persepolis. And I do want to read that at some point, because that does seem very good, but I don't know if it's just me working on the political channel, but I just don't want to read about 1970s Iran right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of heavy. I want to do something a little bit lighter. So we are doing Kingdom Come.
I like how you say that, and then you say Kingdom Come.
Yeah. I mean, Kingdom Come, it's got some heavy themes in it. It's very biblical at times. But it's still a Superman story at the end of the day.
And it's also the most beautiful, oh my god.
It's the most beautifully depicted comic. If you're unfamiliar with Kingdom Come, it is made by Alex Ross, who is known for his, photorealistic oil paintings of, superheroes, specifically DC Comics, but he's done some other ones.
If you ever wanted to have, a poster of a comic panel, or even, a comic artist's, rendering of something... most of the time you're going to want an Alex Ross because they look stupid gorgeous.
He's been known for doing, again, some of the greatest posters, some of the greatest, comic book covers. But he does the entire comic book this time.
It's ridiculous.
So you're looking at a comic book that is literally every frame is a painting.
Mm-hmm.
The entire thing has been oil painted in this photorealistic style. And even if you don't really like comic books, it's just, beautiful to see the artistry that went into this. I cannot comprehend how much time it must have taken to make some of these frames. Just absolutely stunning. And the story is really good. The story's by Mark Waid, who, I can't think of what else he's done, but I know he's written quite a few, comic book stories. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the more poignant stories. It's also something that you can enjoy without knowing a whole lot about DC Comics.
Yeah.
You should kind of know, who Superman and Batman are. A little bit about Shazam. That's kind of important. Maybe a little bit about Wonder Woman. The fact that Wonder Woman kills people and Superman doesn't is kind of, key to this part of the story. But other than that, yeah, it kind of, exists in its own weird universe where everyone aged, and it kind of deals with the children and grandchildren of the superheroes you know.
We don't want to get too far into it and start doing our own review of it, though.
No, I just want to talk about the main idea, because I want to, hopefully, because this is short enough, because it's Christmas time when people can get gifts and stuff like that, we can get people to come on in, check this out with us. And again, if you are not part of the Patreon, you can join that for $1, get on the Discord, and then you could submit questions and discussion points for Kingdom Come. Sort of join in the show, just make it a little bit more like a community, like an actual book club.
We want to hear what you want to say.
Yeah.
So talk to
us. Go
us.
in there, especially for something as fairly short as this.
And well known.
Yeah. So check that out, and until next time...
keep reading.
By the light.